This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus with Candace Pollock. And today we are going to continue down a path we started on our last podcast. And this one is labeled Understanding What Drives Us. And I think this is going to be interesting, Candace, because you suggested on the last podcast that I might want to take this assessment, and I did. And my number one thing is I'm a controller, and wow, I thought I had improved over the years, but obviously I'm a control freak. What can I say?
Well, but that may not be entirely a black and white outcome. All right.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of this, because I certainly have taken my share of assessments, and I've taken a boatload of programs. Mostly, I'm working on my own stuff, and then I like to turn around and share it with people who are dealing with their own stuff, people like Coach and so on. So the idea is, I hope, with this series, that we can all feel a little more compassionate towards ourselves, but more, just knowing, what was the phrase that somebody used? Awareness by itself, even if it coupled with compassion, doesn't mean it leads to change. And so what I really like about the positive intelligence approach is it's an operating system, in essence, that everything else can fit into. And the part that is particularly beneficial in my mind, in my humble opinion, is they give you specific tools that weaken some of that stuff that we don't like about ourselves or others or circumstances.
Okay.
So that's why and the Intentionality Gurus is all about understanding that hidden stuff that drives us. And so now here's something with some specific insights and tools to be able to maybe have a different outcome.
Okay.
So just reviewing some of the points from last time, we develop these mechanisms when we're children, when things might be scary. I remember my younger sister used to stare at me. We shared a bedroom and she would stare at me. And she also slept with her eyes partially open, which totally freaked me out. And I was teased by my family on everything. I was a sensitive child and I cried easily and a whole bunch of things. And people who know me now might not think that's the case. But it's still inside of me. I'm that little Tony the Tiger's cornflake kids on the inside. And that's the point, that some of these mechanisms we use to deal with scary or less than secure circumstances when we were little, as something as simple as a younger sister, teasing me by keeping her eyes open and freaking me out, and others teasing me. Then in adulthood, and this is an oversimplistic statement, in adulthood can still be operating on some level. So last time we talked about how it starts out as a coping mechanism, and then we continue to use it into adulthood when it no longer serves us. Theoretically, we have other tools, but on some level, it's still operating, beneath the surface, but, that part of the iceberg. So, in reviewing last week, they talk about the survival brain. So that's where we have the little kid who doesn't have sophisticated thinking. Oh yeah, mom, is looking funny. It's not because she doesn't like me, or, I may lose her love just because I dropped and broke that jar or whatever it happened to be. It's because something else was going on. We don't have that ability. But as adults, we can, separate our actual survival from how we're interpreting things. So they call that the survival brain. It's kind of on that primitive level. And then the PQ brain, their term, is the more evolved brain that comes about with these exercises that we can employ.
Okay.
Right? So when you take the assessment, what you're discovering is the main categories of what they call saboteurs, ways of thinking, ways of behaving that are rooted in our childhood that are not necessarily serving us now. Right?
Okay.
Now, what happens is for instance, there's one that's called high achievers, a saboteur. And what happens with that could be for highly impactful people who are achieving a lot and so on, but maybe at the cost of their health and the quality of their relationships and so on. And they may be telling themselves, the saboteur thinking is, I need to keep striving and doing more and more and more because I'm only as good as my last movie. I need to make money in order to get acceptance and be thought of, favorably, whatever that thinking is. All right. But the downside to it is there's no resting and no actual security, and it can alter, how we might otherwise interact with people.
Right.
So you said controller was one of your saboteurs. So just for overarching, a little bit of a review. So the judge is the master saboteur, and everybody has that. And that's that negative voice. Martha Beck calls it the lizard brain. I think others, I think it's Rick Hansen calls it the lizard brain. Others call it the monkey brain, where we're constantly, chattering like, what were you thinking of when you did that? Like, when are you going to learn? All that stuff we do to ourselves.
Right.
And for so far as we know, humans are the only creature that does it. And there's been lots of articles and research on why that may be, but it was supposed to be anchored to our original need for literal survival when we were more primitive versions of ourselves. But the controller, and this all comes from the book, so this isn't my material, it's their material. So what they tell us about the controller, and these things have been researched, is it's based on anxiety and the need to take charge in control situations, bending other people's actions to one's own. And it actually causes high anxiety and impatience when it's not possible. So when it's outside of our control. And then in the book, they describe how it shows up, what the characteristics are. And some of the thoughts are, I'm either in control or I'm out of it. And others want and need me to take control. They need that leadership. Somebody's got to do it. Right. And this is my favorite. It happens to be one of my little mantras. No one can tell me what to do. And I remember my friend's, I think she was 2.5 or 3. She was just a little dinky girl with an older brother and a very, very assertive mother. And she used to walk around the house saying, I am the king of me. So nobody's going to tell me what to do, like what time to go to bed and those kinds of things. But what happens is the anxiety is builds up, and then we feel we need to control in order to quell that anxiety. But when we can't control, and there's certainly things that we're not going to be able to control, we just are adding to that anxiety. And then what can happen, and this is the part that fascinated me, is how we show up can impact how other people's saboteurs show up, whether we're triggering their saboteurs. All right. So if you had 2 controllers, just imagine what that might look like.
Yep.
And it's all coming out of anxiety that if you're not in control, then somehow you're less than. So something in childhood, it might have been like an older overbearing sibling. It might have been, I don't know, just my understanding of adult children of alcoholics tend to really have a desire for master control because life was so chaotic when they were younger.
Got it. Okay.
Emotional abuse and so on, but it's not confined to that. So any more thoughts about controller for you?
Well, when I saw it come up, it brought back a picture of me in corporate America. And it basically was, well, if nobody's going to do it, I have to do it because if it's got to get done. And that's how I worked for 10 years, right from the first day on the job. And, other people didn't have to do it because they knew I was going to. I mean, I look back and I see that. And I thought to myself, well, but I'm not like that anymore. And I guess it sort of disturbed me to think that as I did the assessment, I'm thinking of something that actually put me back into that mold. Um, so it confuses me, but to some degree, yeah, I I am a controller. I do so many things around here, not, and I don't wait for others to do it as well. So maybe that's part of the personality. I don't know.
So if you were to focus on how it was a coping mechanism when you were little, what occurs to you?
Um, well, again, it was to make everybody happy. If as long as, I took care of it, even if I didn't do it well, um, everybody else around me was happy.
So that's a way for you to be validated and
Right.
to get along, be accepted, and
Yep.
so on.
Yep.
So in the book, they describe how there are basically, there's the master saboteur, the judge, and then there's the 9 accomplices. We all have all of them,
Okay.
but the accomplices, there tend to be 1 or 2 that are dominant, at least in the beginning, before you start to do all the exercises. And then as those weaken, if you do the exercises, then the next ones, more or less in the pecking order, will appear to be dominant. But also, they talk about motivations and styles associated with the saboteurs. So this is what I really love about the system. And it's just a construct, a mental construct that makes it really easy to kind of understand, okay, if I hit this block, something will pop up or pop open. And if I hit that one, something else will pop open.
Right.
So it makes sense to me in that regard. So when we're talking about the motivations, there's 3 main motivations. So it's for independence, it's for acceptance, or security. So how would the controller show up with those?
Well, especially when I was a child, it was for acceptance. In corporate America, not so much for acceptance, but more for what were the other 2?
So this independence, acceptance, and security.
Oh, it would have been security. Because if it got done, then, I still had my job.
Okay. And then the different styles are being assertive, earning this thing, this motivation, or avoiding.
Wow.
So what they say with the style for controller is assertive.
Okay.
All right. Certainly isn't avoiding, because
Right.
you're exerting some control and so on, and it might have some earning parts to it. Obviously, these are, as I said, mental constructs,
Sure.
Theories, and so on. But, and tell me what your experience is. But for me, this made it a little easier for me to actually have a little compassion for that little corny, not corny, the Tony the Tiger cornflakes kid inside of us, that little kid inside of us, to see, okay, here, I'm just trying to deal with, on some level, I'm feeling the same emotions and less than secure about something, emotionally,
Right.
whether I'm conscious of it or not, that's triggering some of those feelings from an earlier time.
Yep.
But it's now showing up, and then it may have served me, soothed my feelings of not being accepted or not being independent, or what was it, having enough security. And so does that change anything in your mind?
So again, I know that when I was feeling those things in the old job, I felt like a child that was insecure. And the only way to be secure, to be accepted, was to get the job done and to prove that, I was worthy. And, you know, today I'm not so sure it's exactly the same, but I think it's maybe more proving to myself that, um, you know, I can do what's needed.
Yeah, and you probably have well, I know you have a remarkable track record in terms of accomplishments. So where we gain some of our sense that we do have some control over our existence, where when we were little, we wouldn't necessarily have that.
Right, right.
The other part is to basically, with the exercises and so on, it breaks down into tends to break down into looking at things from three perspectives. So one is, how does this show up regarding myself? How am I turning this on myself? How am I turning it on others? Or how am I blaming or turning it on circumstances? So that can be context. So that's work versus maybe being at home. And we've described the term that I've coined, which is male acquired ignorance syndrome. I know it's a sexist statement, etc., but I'm going to go there anyway. The idea, my observation in many male dominated offices was that many men were not afraid to say, I don't know how to use the copier.
Right.
Now, they wouldn't admit to something like that was like male oriented necessarily, but at that time, the women did the copying, et cetera, et cetera. But we felt we needed to do all of those things to a high standard. And we would, rather than resisting it, saying, I don't want to do it. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
No, you absolutely are. And I noticed that here on my home front, my husband will say that he doesn't do the laundry because he doesn't know how to do the laundry. And yet when I was taking care of my mother for 2.5 months, he did the laundry, but I'm here and now he can't do the laundry. Or if he does, he can only do he'll throw his one dirty shirt in the washing machine because that definitely was dirty. And I remember seeing this at work as well. I remember I had a Keurig coffee maker in my office, and the guys would come in for a cup of coffee, and every time we'd be like, how do you put this in? And it's like the same way you did yesterday, but they were waiting for me to do it for them. In the beginning, it would just be like, oh, I guess I should just do this for you. But I finally got around to saying, if you don't know how to do it, I guess you don't want a cup of coffee.
But that takes a lot of, intestinal fortitude, because that can be part of what triggers our saboteurs, that something has to be done. It's up to me to do it.
Right.
And
right.
Not everybody's groomed that way. So what they talk about in the book is that our saboteurs are part nature and part nurture. I was an uber sensitive kid. I was very, very shy. I had to take speech classes in kindergarten. I was so quiet. And that doesn't, I think what most people think about me is it's not, those are not qualities that they would assign to me now.
Right.
But inside, I'm still that same person. And being aware of it, it makes it a little easier to, not all the time, and certainly not most of the time, but to be a little more self-compassionate and so on. So in terms of looking at the saboteurs, when you're reading your assessment, you can be looking at it from the perspective of how this was a coping mechanism rooted in some prior time. And although the positive intelligence approach is not getting into root causes and trying to remedy those, it's looking at how this manifests itself now, and whether that's in ways that you desire or not desire. And
Okay.
then on the things that are not desirable, to catch ourselves in the act and then implement these exercises in the moment and then outside of the moment, so that we can start to weaken that knee-jerk reaction. And we've talked about that before in terms of the thoughts or the circumstances, the thoughts, the feelings and actions, how we need to
Right.
parse it out. Well, this is on that concept on steroids. So what was your other little saboteur? What was your second one?
I don't remember, because I got hung up on control, and it was like, hey, this is something, I thought I had really worked hard on to let go of. And to some degree, I really have. But the more I started thinking about it, it was like, yeah, there are still areas that I just jump in and do things. And I know it causes conflict, not just within me, but conflict with the people around me. And one incident, I have another podcaster who keeps asking me to help them get guests for their show. And it's like, well, but it's your show, whatever. But okay, I'll help you. And every time I do get a guest, it's usually, oh, could you find somebody else? And, I start getting myself like really worked up about it. And so I've realized that I've allowed my old personality to get in there and, control the situation. And after I took this assessment, I started thinking of ways how I could not be, not control it, and just, I guess I would still be controlling it, because I'd say, I no longer want to do this for you. And that I guess is part of the whole pattern too, right?
Well, you would be noticing it. So now that you have that fork in the road, I either continue to proceed in the way that I might habitually unconsciously proceed, or I will explore another route, which may be, I'm just going to watch the TV screen and say, oh, I wish I could help you, but not. But in between that is, what are you saying to yourself? How are you judging yourself in terms of whether you're too controlling or not doing it correctly? That's the part we need to pay attention to as well, because that's the part that does the damage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Yep. And so if we can, some of the exercises we went through is at various pivot points during the day, we more or less have a little alert on their phones or on the calendar to say, like, stop, look, and listen. If you, what do you anticipate is going to be a challenging situation where your controller might show up? And then you can kind of think through, what would that feel like in your body? So really getting in touch with your body compass, so okay, I'm feeling that thing, that tingling in the back of my neck. That means my controller is coming out, whatever it happens to be for you. And then what am I going to do in order to surf that feeling so that I can get on the other side of it? Because it's not that we control or we don't control, it's what we're saying to ourselves, maybe even saying to others, that we're feeling not so great about. Okay. That's the part that, and then if we can address that, then that need to control doesn't need to be so dominant. It can, there may be episodes where that is necessary. There's a fire and somebody needs to get people out of the house. Okay. But so it's not all or nothing. It's just being aware of why we're doing it and whether it's actually serving us or if it's sabotaging us.
Well, I'm going to have to dig through my email and find my results again and look at them and, try to decipher them a little bit better.
Well, and the book is excellent for that. And they say that in time, after you've done a lot of the exercises, you can do the assessment again, and the score will change depending on, which saboteurs you were working on. So mine happened to be restless, and my second one was controller. They were actually equal in terms of dominance or prominence. And I have noticed the restless part. I've really been able to get a handle on that. And that was something that intellectually I understood I needed to do it. And what it means is that I have to constantly be busy, more or less as a distraction from uncomfortable feelings and so on. But not necessarily meaningful busyness. It could be, stupid stuff. But anyway, the point is there's an evidence-based process that's been proven to show improvements.
Well, I know I want to improve, so that way I can control my improvements, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And then you can suggest them to other people.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in one of our podcasts today, the person who was our guest, she lives in Costa Rica. She is a yoga instructor and very into everything, very natural, very just being aware of everything around her. And as I was listening to her, I really felt good. It was like this burden was taken off my shoulder just listening to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about it afterwards, and it was like, I don't know if it's because she's in Costa Rica. I don't know if it's because, she's so into yoga and everything natural, but I would love to feel more like how she was. But I sometimes feel I can't because I'm here with the hustle and bustle around me. But yet, after I got finished with the podcast, I usually automatically just go and load it up and put the graphics in. And, I have this whole process. But yet I didn't do that afterwards today. And that made me realize that I too can take those deep breaths. I too can, set myself aside when needed. And I just have to be more aware of it.
Yeah, it's noticing those little forks on the road, because we can drive down the lane the same way and never see that there's a little turnoff there that we might want to explore. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you. And to all of our listeners, we're coming up to holiday season. So I know one of the gifts that I want to give myself, which I've been doing for a while, is just being more aware of what makes me feel good, what makes me not feel so good. And I hope they're all learning a little bit from our conversations and will join us on one of our shows.
Would love to have somebody as a guest.
Absolutely. We will be in touch soon.
Karen.
Have a happy Thanksgiving. Talk to you soon.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.